Hi, everybody, and welcome to this discussion on consumerism in booktube. I'm Marines. You're on my channel, so you probably know who I am, but I'm here joined by a bunch of my friends who, when I sent them messages last week and I was like, hey, you want to do this like last minute? They were all like, yes. So they're already amazing in my book, but I'm going to let them introduce themselves and their content and their channels, starting with Sajid.
Hi, my name is Sajid. I'm from the channel Books Are My Social Life because books are my social life. So yeah.
I can go next. I'm Deboki. I am from Okie Dokie Boki. I talk about books. I talk about some science stuff sometimes. Yeah, that is me.
And hi, I'm Paige from Minimal Bookie. I talk about books and publishing on my channel because that is a caveat of this conversation. I am going to be coming at it halfway as a professional and halfway as a booktuber.
And so this is a conversation I think that is one of like the perpetual ones in booktube. Like we have like the ones that come up every so often and take turns, and consumerism is definitely one of those ones, and for good reason, because I mean it's about obtaining books and that's like literally what we do. So I am like, it's one of the things that I love talking about too, just because kind of tracking how that's changed for me as I started my channel. We did a panel on BookNet Fest about this before, which Paige was on. So it's one that every time it comes up, I'm like, oh, yay, let's talk. I have feelings. But I guess to set a baseline for everybody, can you share with everyone watching kind of how you approach obtaining books, or what your rules are for obtaining books if you have them, what your collection sort of looks like, that sort of thing?
I can start, but I used to be really strict with how I acquired my books when I first started my channel because I was coming from a place of minimalism when I first started. And I used to use the library a lot more. And that way I would decide like what books I bought. If I really liked them, if I really loved them, then I bought a physical copy. Now more so I do it through ebooks because I have more disposable income, since half of the books I buy I do get through work. So any book from another publisher that I want, I will buy an ebook version first. And then if I really, really liked it, I end up buying a physical copy to like add to my collection. There's a couple on here where I was just like very eager to read at the time, and I just ended up buying them, and then they're still there unread. So I feel like most of the time I'm pretty good. Like I buy books when I really, really want to read them, and then I end up reading them immediately. So it sort of like culls my collection down, except for the workbooks, which I'm gonna drown in one day.
I'm terrible because I have no system. I have no control sometimes. It's just like, I want a book, I buy it, like that Ariana Grande song. So yeah, I mean, so I've been recently trying to like curb that because all of my book buying recently has been like on Amazon, because buying books down here in Trinidad is a little bit difficult sometimes because the bookstores tend to not really have the variety that I'm looking for a lot of the times. Plus, they're very, very expensive. So it's easier and cheaper to get from Amazon sometimes. But recently, I've been trying to like curb that and to kind of reduce my spending online and trying to support like local independent bookstores as opposed to local chain bookstores. So there's actually a bookstore called Paper Beast in Trinidad that sells like Caribbean books predominantly. So I've been trying to like support them and stuff. But I'm so bad at reading books because I don't read like as much as most booktubers. I read like maybe 5 books a month. So, and I don't buy 5 books a month. I buy like a lot in general. So what would happen is I would just buy a book. It would go on my shelf. It would sit there and look pretty, and it would remain there for either a good while. Sometimes I might read it quicker, but most of the time the books are there for at least a couple months before I end up picking them up. So I kind of need to like work on that.
Yeah, my approach to book buying has generally been like, I try to buy books that I already know that I love. So I usually check out a lot of books from the library, read them. If I like it, I add it to like a list of books that I'm like, okay, I love this. Down the road, if I'm buying books, I'm gonna buy from this list. The major exception to that is like nonfiction in particular. I usually buy because I want to like read it. I want to take notes. Like there's a lot more stuff going on there. And also like sometimes I get a little bit lax about those rules too, even with fiction, and sometimes to my own detriment. Sometimes it works out. Like, it's a mixed bag. So, I mean, there are like principles behind this, but also like it's just sheer laziness. Like, I really hate having to deal with getting rid of books, and I really, really hate moving books. And so, like, especially when I was like living in an apartment and I knew I wasn't going to live there, I was like, I like just looking at my shelves and thinking like, one day you are going to have to move this, was just like, okay, like that's a good reason for me to like not add to it. But like, this is also like, I've been lucky to live close to good libraries, so like that's definitely helped it out. So they've enabled that, and it's a mixed bag.
When I started booktubing, I was living with my parents at that time, so I was like in my small room at my parents' house. I didn't really have room for a collection. I had some books that I'd like acquired from like my whole life because I've always been a reader. But then I joined booktube, and I did the thing that you do when you join booktube, and I just started acquiring a lot more books. But at the very beginning, like, I have always said on my channel that my rule is that my collection is books that I've read and loved. So I'm primarily an ebook reader or library reader. So if I loved a book, then I would buy it and put it in my collection. And I was saying that for like 5 years, until this year I was like, bitch, you're surrounded by books. These are not books you've read and loved. Like, take stock of what has happened here. And so I'm like in the middle of like this giant like unhaul project, because I was, that idea of like I might have to move came up for me because of the pandemic. I lost my job. I live alone in this apartment, and there was a chance that I would have to go back to my parents, back into that small room, except for my book collection, like, is 10 times larger now. So it's like, okay, thankfully that didn't end up happening, but still, like, you need to not only have a collection for the you now, but like for the future you. What do you want to own forever? And it wasn't what I currently own. So I started taking kind of stock of that. But in theory, what I've always wanted my collection to be is books that I've already read and loved. I have no interest in owning books that I haven't read or that I read and didn't enjoy. Like, especially books that I read and didn't enjoy. Like, I get no joy from seeing them on my shelves at all. So I think that, as I mentioned, that this conversation kind of comes back around a lot within the booktube community. And I think part of it is that as every person has their channel, like, you have to kind of face this as on your own, like as you're creating content. And then also things change. I think as you change as a reader, like maybe you're reading more ebooks now. Like, I never read audiobooks when I joined booktube, and now I do. So that's like a different way that I spend money, or that I get it from the library. So I think we're always reevaluating this. But apart from like the single, like my decisions, like, I want to talk about this in like a larger booktube sense. Like, why does it matter, this topic of consumerism? And, kind of the other end of that is sort of this idea, well, everybody's entitled to do whatever they want with their money. So like, what is the larger community context to this conversation of consumerism?
I mean, I think the community has a way of perpetuating consumerism, like, because I mean, you were talking about when you first joined booktube, and I think for a lot of us, when we first joined the community, our consumerism habits changed drastically. I started watching booktube only a couple months after I started reading, like, for fun, because before that I was never a reader. And I remember when I first started reading for fun, I was okay with just going to the library or borrowing books from friends. I didn't see the point in buying books because that was just money to waste. And then I started watching booktube videos, and I saw all these nice shelves and everybody's background, and I'm like, oh, I want that. And then I started to become a little bit more, I mean, I don't want to use the term materialistic, but I started to become a little bit more materialistic. And so I started like, I developed a value for the physicality of books that I never had before. And that was because of the book community. And that's because we have this kind of culture of film in front of your glorious bookshelves and book hauls and all of these different things, which were especially really popular back then when I joined in like 2015. So I think there's like this culture of consumerism that's tied in with the publishing industry and whatnot. And it's very much present in the book community. And I think for a lot of people who join the community, our consumerism habits might change because we're kind of assimilating ourselves into this space where the norm, for lack of a better way of putting that, is to have many books and to do hauls and to acquire books and to get books from publishers and to, you know, so yes, like I understand what people mean when they say, well, it's a personal thing. You could spend your money however you want, but like, you know, you're also taking part in a culture of perpetuating consumerism. And that's not a bad thing, because I do it too. We all do it to an extent, but like, it's not just a matter of like individuals making different choices. It's like, it's a very much a culture in our community, I think.
And I wonder like how much of it, because you mentioned like arcs and stuff and book hauls, I wonder like how much of it is publishing, as sacrosanct as it's going to be for me to say, because like this is my job, I need to make money, so publishing needs to make money. But because like the bigger booktubers get arcs and all like sent free finished copies of books, and then they haul them and people end up buying them because they see them, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like I wonder how much of it is people actually buying books and how much of it is like free books being placed in the community that's impacting our consumerism. Yeah,
a lot of my framing for like understanding consumerism comes from like college, like end of high school, college years of like when fashion blogs started becoming a thing. And this was like really like when influencer was still not a word, but like a lot of that stuff was just starting, and you're like watching people get free clothes, and then you're like, I want that thing. And like there's, I think it's part of every internet community. Like it is the thing that you build a connection around. Like, I got this thing, you got this thing, we're all so excited we got this thing and we can talk about it, you know? And so like there's a very like wholesome part of that, but then obviously like there's a part of that that is very easy to kind of like derail. And also like it is part of marketing, like both cynical and uncynical. Like it is like a natural part of like any community, like hobbying, like, you know, sewing, gaming, any of these communities that like any company can come in on and be like, cool, we're going to drop in some free shit and like other people will want it. Like, of course, that's going to become a part of like how that community like integrates together, is around the free shit or even the stuff that people are buying.
Yeah. And I think that it's so weird to me because like consumerism isn't exclusively a booktube thing. Like you said, it's like it's like part of internet culture. And then we're also engaging in like on YouTube, but we're also engaging with the publishing industry. And there are so many intersections of like where consumerism is influencing. But I just feel like anytime that this conversation tries to come up, that like we're all like, oh, okay, we're talking about this. There's immediately, not necessarily from all angles, but there tends to be a defensiveness that can shut down the conversation. And I think that one, it is because it is personal, like we're talking about my finances, like please leave me alone. Like I don't owe you my bank account or anything like that. But and then also like books are really personal, I think, because it feels less like a good and more like an art, you know, like something that is very much more like, I don't know, like you invest in. So I think that the reaction is to get very defensive and not to engage with these ideas of how we engage with publishing and free marketing and what it means that, you know, I'm having this conversation, we're all having these conversations, and we have book stacks visible in our frame. So we're participating in some way in this thing, but that doesn't mean that we can't engage with it also. And people will say like, you know, oh, you don't need books to start a booktube channel. And that's true. But also, if you look at what is most successful, that's saying something to the community and it's saying something to people who are joining. And this is the picture of what is successful. And that is always, or the majority of time, owning a lot of books. So I feel like there's like you have to acknowledge that in some way.
Yeah, even across, like, not even just with BookTube. I think of Bookstagram specifically because it's such a visual medium. People tend to prefer having physical copies in their photos. And so I feel like also with, like, the props and everything, that also perpetuates a different kind of consumerism. Maybe not even just, like, with books, but with gaining, like, props and certain setups and, like, plans and, like, aesthetics. And you see what's rewarded by what gets the most likes, what gets the most engagement. And then you seek that and you have to buy everything that's in the photo in order to be successful as well.
And it's kind of funny to me because I think one of the things that I love about books as a hobby is that you actually don't like need to have the new thing for it to be fun. Like comparing to things like, again, like makeup and fashion, where like there is kind of some value to like new things. Like books, we have this wealth of books from like forever. And like many people, not everyone, like I don't want to act like this is a universal thing, but like a lot of us have access to libraries. And so for like, at least for me, where like it is easy, I'm kind of like, okay, like can I justify acting in the same way with books that I feel about other like consumer activities, even though I also value books in a way that like I don't value these other things as much.
Yeah, I think that you made like several points that I was like, okay, things that I like want to branch off on. But one is that like when we start to have this conversation, I think people start to generalize and like blanket statement things that it really doesn't take into account the different ways that people access books, the different ways that people read books, the different ways that, or the different means and things that people have, you know, even in terms of, we always think like money, like, you know, oh, I have the money to, but space is like a huge thing. You need like tons of space to own books, and not everybody has that. And I thankfully also have access to a really amazing library system, but not everybody has that. And so it's like people want to make these generalities about consumerism, but unfortunately it's not one size fits all. And like things like, you know, oh, Amazon is good or bad, but for some people that's the only way that they can obtain books. It's like literally the only way that they can. And so we just never get to the nuanced portion of this conversation. It just always stops.
That really resonates with me because I was saying before, I don't really get the variety that I kind of want sometimes down here. So like, you know, the book community online is very American centric, which is understandable because most people are from North America, like who are on booktube. So sometimes for like, in my experience being from here, like all of the books that are coming out, especially the new releases, they all tend to be like books that we just don't get down here, that you know, the bookstores don't order them. The libraries have books that are like circa 2013, right? So it's like, it's difficult to like get these new books that are coming out. And like, yes, I could go to the library and read the wealth of books that already exist, right? And I could read whatever the bookstores have to offer, but that's not what everybody else is talking about, you know? So I think that's another thing too, like the new releases and the kind of marketing that come with them. You know, like the only way I could really get these books is to buy them online or to buy them from Amazon. And if I try to do special orders with like local bookstores down here, it would just be a lot. And I don't even think the libraries offer, I mean, I'm not sure, but I haven't heard of like libraries buying books if you request them to do so. So like, it's difficult because it's like, I can't get a lot of the books that everybody's talking about that I want to read and that I want to participate in the community conversation with. So I always end up having to go to Amazon because it's like the easiest medium through which I could purchase books. But at the same time, Amazon is heavily problematic. And like my internal morals just compel me to like not want to support them anymore, which is why I've been trying to wean off of them. But also the books are so cheap and it's so easy to get. And it's like a double-edged sword with very sharp points. You know?
And I feel like it comes from a place of privilege too, to be like, oh, like, if you can afford to not shop at Amazon, that's a place of privilege. I can afford to go to my independent bookstores in my community and buy my books from them. And it feels wrong to sort of demand everybody else follow your same sense of morality if it's something they just can't afford to do. That's sort of like classist in a way, especially with the discussion around libraries and the idea that I saw somebody in the comments saying that there's an idea that libraries are for poor people. In a sense, like if you can't afford, therefore you have to go to the library. And it just feels like people aren't really nuanced in the idea that everybody will be doing it in their own way. They have their own tier of like, this is where I go for books first, and this is where I go second. And ultimately, if you have to go to Amazon, you have to. It's not on you. It's on our freaking capitalist society. Like we're all just trying to survive, right?
Yeah. And that idea of like, you know, just where you have access, and these all are like barriers to entry into the community. And like at a very base level, it's like, you know, things that you need. Access to internet, that's a privilege. Like an ability to obtain books in any sort of way is also a privilege. So we're talking about like just basic barriers to get into the community that are like more tangible. But then on top of that, it's like what we're talking about of like this culture. And it's not even entirely creators. It's like a bigger thing too, because haul videos are really freaking popular. I don't know if you've ever done a haul video, but people are like all about them in like a larger sense too. So it's like that like cycle, like Paige was talking about too, about like, you know, popular booktubers getting arcs and then having more books and then everybody wants the book. So it's like we've got a few of these cycles that are at work within the community.
Yeah, I put up my first haul video this year, which was books I bought while I was high, which was like, that's the reason I'm doing it, because I think it's a fun concept based on things I was watching at the time. I was watching a lot of videos about people buying shit high, and I was like, I need to do this for booktube.
Yes.
But I like set limits and stuff for myself to be responsible. I was like, I can only spend this much money, and that's all I'm allowed to spend. I'm not gonna just like go ham. I knew like my own constraints personally, and also I did not encourage it in the video. I was like, please do not do this. This is a horrible idea.
I love the idea of telling your future high self how much you can spend on books.
I did not press like the checkout button until I was sober to make sure.
This is like elevated the conversation. Come on booktube while high.
Conscious consumerism while high.
Yeah, and I feel like this year specifically, I've been struggling with consumerism because like we're indoors so much. Like I get the serotonin from buying things online, even if it's not specifically books. I have bought so much stuff, and I've like acknowledged it, and I feel like I'm trying to course correct now later in the year, but like I still forgive myself for the fact like it made me feel good at the time. And right now we're in the middle of a pandemic. If we can afford to like do this and give ourselves the serotonin, you can't judge somebody for doing that.
Yeah.
I think that
No, go ahead.
that conversation around self-care and consumerism too is like such a like it's such a tricky one to navigate too, because it's like and I feel like my feelings on it have like changed so much, and because it gets confounded by so many other factors, because like a lot of companies have like kind of co-opted the language of self-care to sell you things again. And there is that feeling of like, I've done totally the same thing where I'm like, I'm kind of like, I want something to arrive at my household. Like I would like the feeling of something, because if no one else is coming to my door, like,
guy, like,
yeah. Like, hello. But it's also like, I've realized over time from making the mistake many, many times of like buying something, thinking like, okay, I'm going to get this thing and I'm going to feel better, like overall, like, and then just chasing the next version of that feeling by buying a new thing. That like, for me, like when it comes to the idea of self-care and my hobbies, like I have to think more about what I'm going to do with the thing and less about the thing itself. So like with the books, I have to think about like, okay, I'm going to actually read it. Like the self-care is the reading, and sometimes that will involve buying it, but like I got to focus on the reading part first and let the shopping follow.
Yeah. And that's part of like the conscious consumerism part of this, and like being aware of the choices that we're making, like personally also, you know, and the way that that is affecting us also, because it is like this idea of what next. And I think that this is from the outside in why people start questioning like content creators, is because it's like, I just bought these 117 books, and then the next video is like, I'm unhauling 120 books, and
Yeah.
what are you doing? So I feel like whether or not people have the right to question you and your content, the fact of the matter is that you're putting out content for public consumption and criticism, and that kind of comes with it. And I think a lot of times what people are kind of questioning is, you're not reading, but we see you buying, like that sort of thing. And I'm not necessarily saying that people have the right to question it, and definitely they don't have the right to be like mean to you about it as a content creator. But the fact of the matter is that if I didn't want people to like comment on the fact that I was getting rid of a ton of books, I wouldn't have made videos about it. I would have just gotten rid of them quietly and nobody would have known. But I made content about it. So then I'm sort of inviting other eyes to be on this process as well. And that's kind of what we're doing with hauls, is that it's not just like a self-care or a private thing. I'm also now making a video for an audience, and that introduces another layer to this conversation.
And I feel like on hauls, oh, you can go, Sajid.
I was just gonna say, and that inevitably paints, you know, people's perception of you, because, like, you know, if people see that, okay, because a lot of people don't really have the money to buy books and to do book hauls in the way that a lot of booktubers do. So it's like you make a video and like, hey, 23 books I bought this month. People are automatically going to jump to assumptions, even though they don't know how hard you work or how you spend your money. They're going to be like, she bought 23 books this month. She rich, you know? So like, you know, they're always going to like have that perception of you. And then when you're doing the unhauls and you're getting rid of the books, and I think that has to do with the fact that I think consumerism has led us to buying more than we read sometimes. I could definitely say that for myself. Like sometimes we buy a little bit more. Like if I count the amount of books that I bought in a year and then the amount that I read, the amount that I read is always smaller. So it creates the perception too that you don't read. When you do read, you're buying kind of like supersedes the amount of books you actually read. So again, people will see that and, you know, make what they want of it. And you just kind of have to deal with it, I guess. I don't know.
And I feel like the pendulum sort of switched like very briefly, either last year or the year before, I think 2018, where everybody was talking a lot more about like minimalism on BookTube and like doing unhauls, and then those got popular. And I think that's why we're seeing both of these together, because you get rewards for doing hauls, but you also get them for doing unhauls now. So you're gonna get both and like juxtapose what you're reading currently is. So it's like really interesting to see what content has been. I feel like hauls have become less popular as well. I haven't seen as much this year, but I think also that's because of the pandemic. So that's been affecting video content.
Remember, there was a period in time where everybody, like before they started calling it unhauls, like everybody was saying, I'm con-marrying my TBR. I'm con-marrying my bookshelf.
Yeah.
Because of that one book everybody was reading.
Yeah.
I think too, like to the idea of like right now, because we're in such a weird time, like my like sympathy and like I know how it feels goes out to people who are sort of engaging with self-care as like buying material things, whether or not that's like the right way to do it. But like I have felt those feels. I have bought those books, honestly, like during this time. But the opposite of that too is like everybody in the community who is seeing this and is coming from a position of like struggling right now, like not having jobs, not, you know, things that are, so there's almost like a way that hauls and unhauling can be flippant, I think, that is also personal for people who are having a harder time. Like in this economy, it's sort of like the idea of like, you know, watching these things that you're just kind of like casually and flippantly doing these things without kind of considering the context for other people. Again, whether or not that gives them the right to comment or critique what you're doing, I don't know, but it's part of your video not existing in a vacuum, or the things that you're doing not existing in a vacuum. It's part of the community, and it's also part of this like larger thing that we're all experiencing.
Yeah, and I feel like my brain just completely turned off, but I feel like also part of it is like my brain turned off twice as I had the thought back, but it's also about like where you're putting your money when you are buying these things, because I think of every dollar you spend is sort of like your vote on what kind of books you want the publishers to be publishing, especially at this time during a pandemic when we have way more books than we normally would have coming out in the fall. It's especially important for you to spend your money, if you're going to be spending this money, on the books you want to see like more from the authors of, because that is how publishers are going to assume, like when they're coming for their 2022 list, they're going to look at the numbers now. And I feel like people often forget that. They say like, they just think in general of their personal library without thinking about the fact that they're actually impacting an entire industry of people and like what power we have within the industry, like what books we want to publish, but we're not allowed to because there's no proof of concept because of the money being spent. Yeah.
Yeah.
The brain rallied, guys. It rallied.
I mean, like, same, because, like, one thing that I will say is that my consumerism has gotten a lot better ever since I kind of cooled down on reading white authors, because, like, they're, like, the majority of what's in the industry, right? So it's, like, when I kind of made that active decision to start reading books from more, you know, authors of color, LGBT authors, Caribbean authors, etc., I kind of became almost minimalist in a way in my book buying. Like I still, you know, buy a little bit too much books sometimes, and I still go a little bit overboard sometimes. But I think that, you know, I definitely have, like when I first started buying books, I was buying everything everybody was talking about. So all, you know, Hunger Games, Divergent, everything, like all the white people books. And then I kind of started to realize that, okay, I need to kind of like get a little bit more, you know, like flavor in my, you know, reading taste, because I'm just reading white authors. And I think when I started to make that decision to narrow down my choices and be more conscious about what I'm reading, I think it kind of curbed the bad consumerist habits that I was developing, because I just wasn't really interested anymore in reading, like, I don't know, Six of Crows or something, right? That's the name of the
I
book,
just
right?
love you name dropping every basic white author.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I mean, like, it's just like after a while, I was just like, I need to read stories that reflect the things that I'm more interested in seeing, and and so, yeah, I enjoyed kind of like being a little bit more minimalist with my choices and being a lot more deliberate with where I put my money in this publishing industry. And like you were saying, Paige, I think, if we're going to participate in it, if we're going to be problematic capitalists or pawns of capitalism, we might as well try to be the best problematic pawn of capitalism we could be and support,
Definitely.
support the right authors and titles, so.
Yeah, I think that is like such a tough part of the conversation too, because like part of me is like, yeah, I want to support all these authors, but I still I personally cannot I cannot save the publishing industry, right? Which is not what you're saying, but like just in general, I wish I could, right? But I can't. So trying to figure out what that balance is between supporting the authors that I want to support, but also making sure I'm not doing it to the detriment of my personal space, well-being, and everything. And I think that is one of the great things too about BookTube, about being part of a book community, is that by talking about books, even if you're not spending it, obviously buying the book is the best thing you could do for the author. You're putting the money directly in their, well, not directly, but you are putting the money in their pocket. But short of that, talking about books is a way to express support, interacting with people about them. That is a way to show support for books. And so sometimes I think that, yeah, that's where I'll end. That's when it comes to the idea of support too, talking is also useful.
I feel sometimes I totally agree, and obviously it's important. Part of the reason that I want my collection to be books that I've read and loved is because then I want to support the thing that I enjoyed and the art that I consumed. That's my ideal collection. But I think a lot of times that when we're having this conversation, that idea of well, I'm supporting the industry is a blanket statement Band-Aid that goes on top of not really engaging with how we support the industry and how there's different levels to that. And yeah, you can support by buying and pre-ordering and all that stuff, going to your library support, because they're buying these books in mass as well. And hello, you have a channel and you're giving 100% free marketing to all of these books that you're talking about. So you're supporting there as well. So as with everything, there are tiers here of support that you can offer a book without necessarily being making it rain on Amazon and doing that 200 book haul or whatever it is. So, it's just this idea, I think, of actually engaging with your choices and your decisions, especially when you're putting things publicly online for an audience. And if at the end of the day you take stock and you're I feel perfectly fine spending this amount of money, buying it from Amazon, putting it online, this is fine with me and my conscience. You do you, boo. At least you engaged with it.
Yeah.
Considering it. But I feel there's always that stop of not going a step further and really thinking about, okay, if we're saying that it's for support for the publishing industry, what does that actually look like? And what are the different ways that we can support the publishing industry?
And it's what part of the publishing industry are you supporting? Are you supporting the more marginalized people who work in the industry who are trying to make changes but can't right now? Or are you just supporting the industry in general and just encouraging it to continue the way it currently is?
Correct.
Yeah,
right.
I'm and that's something I personally think about when I buy books, because I work in the industry and I see the behind the scenes and I have different discussions about books than we do on BookTube in general.
Yeah, and that's such a great thing to extend to even to libraries. What you're checking out from your library does matter in that way. If that is another way to support authors, that is a way to also establish who you're interested in. That's if you're going to be talking about these books, what you're checking out is still something you're consuming, and it's going to drive what you read. It's going to drive what you talk about. It's still, just because it's free doesn't mean that you can just do it mindlessly. We still have to be thinking about it, especially if we're doing it in a community.
Yeah, because the more books you check out, the more demand there is, the more they're going to buy copies to keep in circulation versus books that go unchecked out versus what's ordered. Everything, we do impact the industry, even if it's a small little thing here and there. Yeah. The huge portion of us, we do impact it.
Yeah.
I immediately, not to be this person, but you're on my channel, so you already know. But immediately started thinking about this stupid Midnight Sun book. And, from when it was announced, we were do not buy this book. We're in 2020, and we understand that this is a racist book. Do not do this. And then what happened? People were donating to the Kiluk tribe and then still buying the book. And then like I was just like, the message that you're giving publishing is not like, yes, donate please to, you know, these Native people who have been like taken advantage of basically because of the appropriation in this book, but also you still have sent the signal to publishing like this is something that we're going to buy and make successful. So like in the larger context of like your dollars mean something, again, it's like engaging with the choices that you're making and not just sort of like, I mean, you don't have to. But kind of like what we're talking about.
And it's like, I mean, I know I'm not the first person to have this opinion about Midnight Sun, but it's like, you know, you're supporting something that doesn't make any sense. She's just rewriting the same book over and over again. Like the third time, and she's flipping the genre. Next time we'll have Twilight from the perspective of like the mosquitoes flying around. Like it's ridiculous. And
that might be the most interesting version.
I mean, it just goes to show, like, you know, why are you putting why it's like you're creating the capacity for this when, you know, when people bought Life and Death, right? It's like you created the capacity for something like Midnight Sun to happen because the publishers don't care if Midnight Sun is good, right? They just know that you're going to buy it and they know they're going to make the money off of it, right? So it's like, it just boggles my mind that, I mean, do y'all like Twilight that much? I don't know. I haven't read it, but like, damn.
She's already discussing writing more books as well. So there's an incentive. So now
yes, like publishing doesn't know your dollars are ironic. They're not like, oh, people bought this, but ironically. So we're not, still gave you your money. So like,
it's like some authors struggle to get their books published, period. And then we have Stephanie Meyer writing the same book over again. I mean, I guess Midnight Mosquito pre-order coming out 2021.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to start scrolling through comments. If there's something that you want to bring up that we have not talked about yet. Oh, man.
I think people are talking about like pirating.
Yes.
Listen, I'm not going to say anything.
I'm recapping Midnight Sun like on Snark Squad, and we had to put like for legal purposes. We definitely got those legally, but... Ask me if I would ever give Stephanie Meyer $1. All right, let's see what's going on here in the comments. I would be interested in hearing if anyone has different opinions on how they buy physical versus ebooks. Some of these are much older and I can't like pin them here, but do you guys find it easier to purchase like ebooks and audiobooks like sort of flippantly and like give more weight to physical books?
Yeah, it's a problem. I've had like a few sessions of like, and I've tried, I mean, I learned from these quickly where I was like, I'm going to be traveling. I'm going to have my e-reader with me and I don't want to carry all these books. I should buy all the books. Like, what if I'm on the airplane and I get really bored and I don't have a book, which has never happened to me. Like since I was like 5, like when I was 5, yes, going to India, like it was a long road, like not a long road, it's a long flight. Like that was a legit problem, but like, not anymore. And I don't know why, like I still see these books when I go through my e-reader and I'm like, you're an idiot. Like you're like, why did you think you were gonna want to read this book? And like, so I've learned since then, and I think like
calling me out.
I mean, don't worry, this is self-directed. If you want to share this with me though, like I am happy to commiserate because I have judged myself fully and it's not good. And I think especially romance novels for me is like a big one because that's like I'm in the mood for it. I hear a title and I'm like I want it right now. I'm gonna read it, and like that's when we're like oftentimes like yes, I actually probably will read it very soon, but like it's just so easy to buy so many at once, and so I'm trying to get better about like checking to see what's on overdrive, like trying to be like and actually asking myself, will I read this tonight? Or like should I wait till tomorrow, see if I'm still in this mood? Like ebooks are a problem.
I mean, with me, it's like a yes and a no because I've never really gotten into the whole concept of buying ebooks until like last year. Because just prior to that, the concept of spending money on a book that I'm not getting physically was just, no, you know, especially I still wouldn't even buy an ebook if it's more than like $5-6, you know. But like I kind of went through a little phase like at the like end of last year. I, you know, brought my Kindle back to life, which I had for years but never used. And then I started to like buy books, and I'm like, oh, this is fun. This is easy. I could get the books. They're not that expensive, like $2-3 on a book, but obviously that adds up. And I just kept buying books and buying books. And I'm like, I had to stop myself. I'm like, Sajid, you're not even reading half of these books. But I think what was so great about it was that I kind of, you know, I liked the idea that, okay, I could buy these books and then I don't have the guilt of them staring at me from the shelves, like these books right here. Let's not talk about them. We just, you know, right? So, like, I don't have to deal with that guilt, right?
Yeah.
You know, so it was easy for a while, but then after a while, I kind of cooled down. I was like, okay, you need to stop. So now I don't really like. Ever since the pandemic started, ironically, I don't think I've bought an ebook since then. Maybe a couple here and there, but I kind of like cut off on the ebooks for now. I told myself I need to read like the 20-something that I have on my Kindle unread before I
20-something. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, with me and books, it's very relative because I don't read as much as most people. So like my TBR is just like, I probably have like 40 or 50 books on my TBR, which sounds very modest for most people, I guess. But for me, that's like a lot. For somebody who reads like 20 to 30 books a year, that's a very
that's a year's worth of
that's like a year and a half worth of reading for me. So, you know, it's very daunting. And that's what I liked about the ebook. It's like, you know, I don't have to deal with this. I could just turn off the Kindle, put it away, and I don't have to deal with the guilt. But it's the same thing you're doing, essentially. You're just not, I guess, killing as much trees. So it's a more environmentally friendly, toxic consumerist habit, I guess. But it's interesting, too, because we were talking, Marinas, about like barriers to entry. And the book you mentioned, how like Overdrive and all these different things. Like I don't have access to things like Overdrive and Hoopla and stuff because those are like, you know, more in sync with like American libraries. So it's kind of like, you know, for people in like, you know, I don't like to say third world because it makes us sound like, you know, but like for people like from countries that don't have, you know, as much library access and ebook access and all this kind of stuff, access to audiobooks and stuff like that, especially free through the library, it's a lot more. It's just a lot more barriers to stop you from reading and from acquiring and getting all of these books.
Yeah. I don't really like. I only buy ebooks if I need the book. So like for like House Salt, I always read the ebook because I don't know if I'm going to like the book. So I'm just like, I'll get the ebook. It's cheaper in the long run anyway. And if I don't like it, I can just delete it off of my iPad and that's like the end of it. And yeah, like that's how I decide if I like really, really need a book like very quickly, I'll get the ebook version of it just because it's faster. And I usually use here in Canada, we have a company called Kobo. So I use them over Amazon. Same with audiobooks. I have my audiobook like membership with Kobo just as like a way to avoid having the Kindle problem.
Yeah. I think that part of the reason also that like my collection kind of got away from me is because when I started BookTube, I was reading a lot more physical books, and now I'm primarily an ebook reader. Like I enjoy reading from my ebook more than I enjoy reading from physical books at this point. So there was a like in the transition, there was a point where I was just like, I'm like inundated with unread ebooks on my shelf from like on my Kindle from a few years ago. So the two things that I had to do in order to like curb this when I was like, you are like, if these were physical books, like you would be drowning right now. So one was that I disconnected the one-click buy. Like I cut it off. I turned it off, deleted all of my information. I am not able to one-click buy anything. Like, not allowed. And two was that I started, instead of putting holds at my library, because I would put holds and I'm a mood reader. And then I would get the hold and be like, I don't want to read that anymore. That was like, you know, a month ago. So now I just go through my available now on my app and see what's available right at this moment. And I'll just scroll and scroll until something catches my attention, borrow it. And if I read it right then, great. And if not, it's like no harm, no foul. But again, that's an access thing, which thankfully I do have access to like Overdrive and stuff. So I'll just kind of do that instant gratification of available now versus putting holds. And I find that it curbs that like want to purchase ebooks and whatnot. All right. More questions. Let's see. Have any of you ever implemented a book buying ban? If so, how did that go for you? What rules did you set?
I think I just did, like, at the beginning of my channel, I was like, I can't buy any book that I haven't read at the library first, because like that was my like stipulation going into creating booktube channel. I was like, I'm gonna stay a minimalist. I'm not gonna let it obviously work.
Minimalist booktuber.
Yeah. That was like originally my name before. Everybody just kept calling me Minimal Bookie, and I was like, I'm just gonna change it because nobody remembers. It's Minimalist Booktuber. But yeah, like that was my stipulation, and I feel like I've pretty much stuck to it. This year has been a weird year, but like normally I try not to buy a book unless I've already previously read it, and like that's my ban sort of stipulation. Yeah.
At the beginning of the pandemic, I kind of went on a bit of a ban because the borders had kind of shut down, and so like when I order books from Amazon, they don't come directly here. I have to use a freight company, and they get it in the States and they bring it here. So I was like, I don't want, because the freight company had stopped for a while, but Amazon kept delivering, and I didn't want them to just keep delivering to people, and then my books were like somewhere that I don't know, sitting down waiting for me to maybe get them one day, probably not. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna stop like ordering, and I think I went like a good 3 or 4 months without buying any new books whatsoever. And then come May, like when things got a little bit better, I think since then I probably got like maybe 30 books or so, or a little bit more. Yeah, more since then. So, I mean, I don't know if the book buying ban did anything because I stopped buying books for a period of time. But like, you know, with a book buying ban, the ideal thing is you'd want to learn a lesson from it so that when you go back to buying books, your habits change. Mm-hmm. But I don't quite know that that was a habit change kind of book buying ban. It was more like I don't really have much of a choice, so I'm just not going to buy anything for now kind of book buying ban.
A book buying ban can be like crash dieting. Starve yourself for a while, and then afterwards you're like, oh no, because I'm just like, you know. I've never done it because I just know myself, and I know if I tell myself, do not buy, you're not allowed to buy books, my brain's gonna go bet, and it's gonna be worse for me. Yeah, it's just how I'm wired. So it's not something that I would ever do.
Yeah, I think the extent for me has just been having the same rule the page was talking about. Like, and the times I've broken it, 70% of the time I've regretted it.
Mm-hmm. I think that's easier for me because I, as I said, I kind of wanted to like cool off on Amazon. So I told myself, okay, no more Amazon purchases for like the rest of the year. And I think that that's something that I could manageably do because I have the other the bookstores down here. So it's not like if I'm completely shutting it off, but I think maybe what I have to do more so is sort of change my habits as opposed to just completely banning the book buying.
Mm-hmm. From Lala, she says, whenever this topic comes up, as it often does, and hot takes arise, I always wonder who that person or group is hoping to influence with their discussion. So when we're having this discussion, like who are we hoping to influence, or what like is the purpose of talking about, you know, consumerism in the booktube community?
I always come at it from like a place of like, I just want people to be more conscious when they're making these decisions. Like, I just want people to think more about the books they're buying because they're products, and yeah, they're products, but there's also like an art element to it, and there's humans behind the book as well that you're supporting or not supporting, specifically the authors, like above everybody else. And I feel like sometimes we can lose like sight of that fact of it. It's like not like buying a like lipstick or something. Mm-hmm. There's like a lot more nuance to buying a book, I feel like, that we don't talk about.
Yeah, I think one of the hard things with books is that it's so easy to like make them into a really precious thing. Mm-hmm. And like when you do that, I think books are precious, but also like at the end of the day, they are still a thing. And like figuring out how to sort that is really hard because like we all like presumably love books, and like it's so hard to talk about books in a way like unlike makeup where you're kind of like, yeah, at the end of the day, the extent to which I need makeup like is a society thing, but I don't need as much as I own, right? Like that is my problem. But with books, like we have like collectively there's like a mentality of like the more books you have, the more educated you seem, the more it seems like you care about the world. Like there's a lot of fetishy ways that we talk about books. And for me, I think like talking about my own habits is really just a way of processing like what is it that I feel about my own book buying habits against all of that? Because at the end of the day, like, there are things about books that I think are precious or sacred, but I also want to like engage with it then in a way that's respectful to like my own relationship with them.
Yeah. And I think that conversation is a really good way of like changing those things within a community. I remember when I started like booktube, nobody really, or for the most part, the most visible people were not doing like negative reviews. And the sort of thing that were like kind of perpetuated throughout the community was like, think of the author, like that author has like children to feed. And it was like a really weird thing in a way that I was like, that's not how this works. Like, that's not, you know, you don't go to like a restaurant and not give a bad review on Yelp because the chef has children. So there is like really weird ways to fetishize like books and authors and writing. But I think that in having a lot of conversations in booktube about critical reviews, negative reviews, we've sort of like changed the direction of how we think about that. So I feel like conversations about consumerism can change the way that we all process this sort of like communally, and hopefully like people do become more conscious like individually. But for the most part, I also really think about people watching who want to join, who have that idea of like, well, I can't. Which when I did a thread on Twitter, there were a handful of people who responded and said, I've always wanted to start a booktube or a book blog, and I haven't been able to because I don't, you know, I don't own books, I don't buy books or things like that. And I know it's like sort of a thing that we just want to be like, well, that's not true, but it's part of what we're perpetuating as a community. So I feel like the more we talk about this, the more we make clear, like, you know, we're all approaching this from different backgrounds, from different means, and everybody curates their collection differently, but you don't need one in order to do this thing. The more we say it, hopefully that opens doors for people to join. This person says, I'm curious why booktubers don't take a stronger public stance on supporting libraries or improving access to books for your children. I feel like a lot of people do talk about borrowing from the library that I follow, but probably that's more recent because I've been more conscious about the people that I follow. I don't know. I feel like if that's like something that you want to see, that there are people out there that are talking about it. People do library hauls. I see them like pretty frequently as well. And like for someone like me, I try to remember to say when I've read a book from the library, but usually I'm just talking about them all together. But I think just maybe talking about it is like making sure that we're pointing that out is like another way that we can start to like shift culture or whatnot.
I never really thought about it because most of the books that I talk about are probably library books, and I've never been like, how do I, or I've always been like, okay, I don't have a book to show. I don't have a way to register that like in a public way. Yeah, I don't have anywhere I'm going with that. I'm just thinking out loud.
I wonder if it's because like it starts as like a hobby, so people don't feel like they have to be taking stances. It feels almost like they don't realize it's a platform to be sharing things that they believe in, as much as it's like we're just talking about books. So like here are the books, rather than like this is where I got them from, and this is why it's important that I'm supporting libraries and that kind of stuff.
I mean, it's interesting because I also noticed like especially when I first started BookTube, like people would often feel like they have to have the book to show in the videos. So like if they don't have the book, they often kind of come with this explanation. Well, I don't have a physical copy, so I had to borrow this from the library. So I'm putting up a picture here. And I would always just be like, just put up the picture and talk about the book. You don't have to, you know?
Oh, that's such a good point. It's like normalizing the way that we talk about it instead of like it being like the, you know, oh no, I went to the library, just like making it a normal thing. And just put the picture up.
I mean, and I think it's a good idea too to maybe just mention it and say, well, I just borrowed this from the library, and just talk about the book, as opposed to like sort of, it almost felt like, I mean, I don't see it as much anymore, but it almost felt as if people kind of like felt like they needed to explain. I'm like, you don't need to explain.
Yeah.
This was from earlier in the live show, so they might have changed their mind, but Dana is offering to personally deliver all books to you, Sajid. Okay.
I love Dana. She's amazing. Y'all should go like subscribe to her channel. Like, I would be okay with that. You know, I wouldn't refuse.
One for the book says people are more worried about defending themselves than identifying the bigger problems with consumerism, which we kind of talked about how this becomes personal. In any time that you're discussing books, like negative reviews or anything that has to do with decisions, I think that, it is personal for a lot of people. And so it's easier to like process it on a personal stance instead of like engaging with like the larger things.
Yeah, because people will feel like because people are discussing something that they do specifically, it's a personal attack versus like a community discussion. And I feel like sometimes it's like the way we discuss things. If it happens on Twitter, I just take a step back and just read everything. And I try not to engage as much in that community anymore because I feel like a lot of the conversation is like very polarized. Like this is right, this is wrong. And then like people are discussing why they believe what they believe without like trying to come to a common ground. Yeah. I miss the days of like when you could do like what is it even called, the video replies on
the responses.
Video response. Yeah. Oh my god. Yeah. OG YouTube.
I'm just like showing my age.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I just said I was just showing my age. Yeah.
Your YouTube.
I'm doing a response to Marinez.
I would be everywhere. Respond to you. I don't know. A lot of people were talking just in general about like used bookstores. So do any of you guys buy used, or do you have access to like a good used bookstore where you are?
I recently went to a used bookstore and I actually included like a vlog of going to the used bookstore like in my book haul, in my last book haul. So that was fun. We have a lot of used bookstores in Trinidad. That's one thing. There's even this one like book shack on the beach called the Book Junkie. It's amazing. It's like this cute little shack, and it's this old man, and he just takes a bunch of used books and he sells them, and it's just so cute. So we have a really good like culture of like used bookstores and stuff down here. Like that's something we don't have to worry about like not being in existence because everybody wants cheap books. So yeah,
that's something I miss about Barbados for real. Like I used to have a used bookstore right across the street from where I would catch my bus. So I would always go like after school right before I went home. There's like a chain in the city where I live that you can go to, but like because I work in publishing, I generally have a way of like I get all of my workbooks because I have to take photos of them and I get to keep which ones I like. So I feel like I don't really go to bookstores in general. I order a lot of my books online. Even if it's from my indie, I will order it online and get it delivered to me just for like a convenience thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in Boston, when I was living in Boston, Brookline Booksmith, if anyone lives in Boston, highly recommend. They have like both the new bookstore part up top, but like downstairs have a really great used book section. That was pretty awesome. But I also like find used bookstores so hard because it's like you see it's so cheap, and I'm always like, oh, like that means I can buy everything. It still doesn't mean that.
Yes.
But I do love used bookstores. I think they're like that's like when I have my list, like that's like why it's been good for me to have a list of books like on my phone. I'm like, okay, when I'm at the used bookstore, these are the titles I'm looking for.
And I think it's cool too. Like when I did the video, I included a clip of like the front of the bookstore with their phone number and where they're located and stuff. So if people in the area and they want to go visit, they could do that. And I think that would be a cool thing for booktubers to kind of include in their content as well, like encouraging people to support. Because as much as we have influence when we buy all these books, and that has an impact on the community. So if we're conscious about talking about going to the library and going to used bookstores and supporting indie bookstores and whatnot, if we could create that culture, because we do have the capacity to do it if we want to, that would be really cool too, because then we'd kind of be shifting the consumerism habits, I guess, in the community.
Yeah, and I miss like the whole, like when you go to used bookstores, you're generally just like browsing to see what they have as well, because they won't have like all the titles that are just like recently released. Yep. So I miss like that element of like exploration and finding new things, like without all the marketing that like goes behind what you generally would find on like the bestseller list.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to highlight this comment basically to also ask you a question that's going to call you out. But for the book says, and the thing is, everyone jokes about buying more books than reading them, but when it's time to have a serious convo, everyone's silent. And I think, Sajid, you mentioned a little bit already about like your TBR, but what is kind of your breakdown or like ratio, I guess, right now of like books that you own and have read to like unread books? Like how is your collection divided?
Well, I mean, well, this first shelf is like all my YA books. Well, most of them. And these ones are unread, but most of them are read. These are all of my read adult books. These are my unread adult books, which this is my shelf of shame. I would say I own about maybe like 100 or so books, and it's very 50-50, I think. Maybe like 45-55. Like, but that's because I get rid of books very frequently. And I more so get rid of the books that I've read versus the books that I haven't read. Because I have one 5-level bookcase and I just don't have the space for a lot of books. And I'm like, if I'm not going to reread something, or if I don't have a very, very strong sentimental attachment to it, it's actually quite easy for me to get rid of the book. I've gotten rid of signed books. Like I had a signed book personalized from a Man Booker author. And I gave that away just the other day to my friend because it's like, if I'm not going to reread it, or if I don't have that sentimental attachment, I'm just not going to keep it. So it might seem bad, like when you look at my shelves initially, that more of my books are unread, but that's because I'm just more inclined to get rid of the books that I've already read versus the ones that I haven't. So that's kind of part of why it's like that. But also because I go a little bit overboard with the buying sometimes.
Yeah, the shelf behind me is my unread shelf. So all of these books are books that I haven't read. But like I said, I get physical copies of books for work. So I get to keep whichever ones that I do want to end up reading. And then I get rid of the other ones. I bring them back to the office when there was an office. Right now, I'm just drowning in books in general. But of like books that I bought personally that are on my TBR, I only have like 30. And that's about like maybe 20% of my overall like owned books that aren't work related. Yeah.
Yeah, this is my TBR stack, but this is mostly like, there's like a stack of library books back there, and then like I think the rest is the stuff that I bought. Sorry, I'm like just managing my mess on camera. But yeah, I think I don't know what like my total number of like books that I own that I haven't read. I would guess it's somewhere around like the 10 to 20 range. But part of the reason, so like Nicole and I have been doing a nonfiction book club, and part of the reason is because we have these, well, I can't speak on her behalf, but on my behalf, definitely part of the reason is because there are these nonfiction books that have been on my shelf that I'm like, I need to read these. It is very embarrassing that I have like been wanting to read them forever. And so like, this is a way of like doing accountability where like, okay, we're gonna read them. So yeah. my like total number of books that I haven't read is slowly starting to decrease.
Yeah. I mentioned that I started doing this project because one, I was overwhelmed with the number of books that I owned overall, and I wanted to cut that down. But two, my like collection became something like 50-50 of unread books and read books, which is I'm still sick thinking about it. For me personally, like I said, because it's not how I wanted my collection. So I've gotten it down to these 3 shelves. Now, do I have 3? Yes, these 3 shelves behind me are all books that I've read and have been rated 3 stars or higher, or like sentimental value or something that I would reread. So these are all books that like I love, that I want to keep in some way. And then right now I think I have like 75 unread books, and that was like a lot more. And so the idea is that these are the books that I'm going to read now. But what I'm finding is that like the more that I do it, the more I'm like, I'm not going to keep all these books. Like more of these are going to go. So yeah. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I've like started doing things on my channel where it's like I'll read a certain genre for like a week, and I feel like that's been helping with my like I already have a couple books that have come off the shelf because like once there's like a goal for my reading and I have like a purpose for reading, it's very easy to pick books off of the shelf versus like I'm in a mood, what do I want to read, and then looking at all these books like I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, this says, I feel like people are allowed to spend money on whatever they want. It's nice to buy a book because then you can take your time getting to it and not worrying about returning it to the library.
I need that urgency.
Yes. Give me a due date.
I mean, like for me, it's like with our library at school, the overdue fees are ridiculous. So it's like you need to read the book before you send it back. But like the public libraries are different. It's literally 25 cents a week. Yeah. 25 cents TT is like probably less than 5 cents US. So it's like when I borrow books from the main library, I keep them for months. I keep them, so I don't have that self-control when I borrow books from the main library. I have a friend who I think she kept her books for almost like a year and a half before she ended up returning them. Like, because they just, I don't know why they barely charge overdue fees. So that's just my particular thing with the library here. But in general, I will say that like sometimes I understand the pressure is a little bit overbearing, especially because I take a long time to read books, and especially like when I have a schoolwork and stuff, I might take 6 weeks to read a book, but I have to return the books for school within like 3 to 4 weeks. So I'd often find myself end up like DNFing books because I have to return them back to the library. So I understand that pressure, but I also think sometimes the pressure could be really helpful. Like, you know, you have that due date, you need to get it done. It's just, you know, you kind of have to have the self-control, I think, to be able to finish the book in time to send it back.
I think too, when we were having the conversation recently about like reading for fun versus reading critically or whatever, I got to a point where I was like, oh, like we're talking about two different things here, like different portions of the community. Because some people were straight up coming out and saying, I don't want to read critically. I don't even want to do reviews. I'm not a book reviewer. And so in my head, I had this moment of like, I always equate booktubers with book reviewers, but that's not necessarily true. You can be a book hauler and still be a booktuber. You can be, you know, any sort of number of like different things that we do. And you don't have to be a book reviewer, but I was approaching it kind of assuming everyone was a book reviewer. And so I think that there's a level of this assumption too, of like, if I am purchasing a book, it is because it is with the intention that I would like to read it, where I feel like there's a separate thing of people who just like to own books with no intention of ever reading them. It's like a throw pillow for them. They just buy a ton of throw pillows. And so I think that that's probably different, but it's not, I don't think, where this conversation is necessarily coming from. It's sort of a different kind of consumerism topic or whatnot. And I don't know. Yes, everybody is allowed to spend money on whatever they would like. That is the bottom line, and we are agreeing with that. But that doesn't stop conversation from happening, and from, like we were saying, more conscious decisions from happening and things like that. So
yeah, like we said earlier, like everybody can spend their money how they want to, but they can't ignore that their money is going to have an impact regardless of if they meant for it to or not.
Yeah.
Let's see what else we got. Lots of love for the library in the comments. I love it.
Yeah, my library card expired and there's no way for me to get it renewed, so we're here.
I lost mine. I'm not seeing mine, so I have to go get like a new one.
Yeah.
And the library is closed.
Is like killing it in the comments right now. The thing is, people also advertise book hauls with the idea that they bought too much, so we sort of glorify overconsumption. And this is, I mean, even with how we see like how we title book hauls and like the thumbnails and stuff, and it's like huge, massive book haul, and it's like
and like holding all the books in the thumbnail as well.
Yeah.
That was me in my last book haul.
It's because you saw it and you knew, like you saw what other people have done and you like mirrored,
Right. I mean, that's the thing, is that I'm not calling any specific person out. I mean, I think I've done book hauls like that too with the same thumbnail, but it's like this idea of like what we glorify, and or sort of the norm of like, you know, overconsumption or buying more than we need or having more than we need sort of thing.
And like when you put specific numbers in like the titles, you see more clicks on that because people are like, what are these 90 or like 100 books that people are?
Books,
yeah.
I mean, like for me with my last book haul, like I had like around 30 books, but that was like after like 4 months of book buying. But then you'd have people who have like a haul every month and they have like 40 books. So I think it's different depending on the individual booktuber as well, and like how often they buy.
Yeah.
Let's see. There's another part of this that I'm like, I don't have a question, but I just want to throw it out there, which is like how arcs fit into all of this. Because I think arcs are like a really funny part of like how we do consumption on BookTube. Like they're both kind of like a status symbol sometimes. They're also like a thing that like people like will stress over NetGalley and Edelweiss, and like it's like, why do we do this to ourselves? Like that kind of feeling. Yeah, I don't know if you guys have thoughts about it. I just wanted to throw it out there as another part of the.
So I think a lot of the books that I'm unhauling, are books that were sent to me by the publisher. And so now I have these arcs that I'm obviously not going to sell or anything like that, but I have to get rid of in like different ways. And I think it goes back to this idea of like when we first joined BookTube, that you're like, buy books. And it's like sort of the natural reaction to the culture. But when you first get big enough, that publishers start reaching out to you, I think that there is a sense of like kind of gorging on that as well. Because there was a while that anytime anybody sent me an email, I was like, you know me? Yes, I'll accept your book.
Yeah.
What are you going to send me? Twilight but aliens? It's fine. You know, like,
Yeah.
I was not being picky at all. I was just like so happy that it was happening, that I was not being a conscious consumer. And so I ended up with all of these arcs that I never read. And, you know, I even went like on a whole spiel about BEA and how the first time I got back from BEA, I had all of these arcs just because I got swept away in it. So I definitely understand how it happens to people. And like, I've been on this community for 5 years. So I've had like that whole time to kind of contend with it. But yeah, the arc thing is like definitely a big part of it. And the culture of arcs in this community is a huge thing because, you know, people push it and glorify it. And like, I read it and I know what happens and I have all these feelings. So that feeds into it as well.
Yeah.
Paige's like,
I come at it from like a different place because like since I work in publishing, like arcs to me, I was always too small to get them before I started working in publishing. So now they're like they're not a big deal to me because I have access to them through work. And like there's still books that I've requested on NetGalley that I really want to read, but like I know I'm just gonna buy a physical copy if I don't get it, like whatever. I don't like have the urge to read it before everybody else, in part because like I read by mood and I probably wouldn't get to it before the release date anyway. But yeah, I feel like even publishing houses sort of take advantage of the whole like exclusivity of having arcs and stuff, and they really want to hype books that way. So it's not even just like the community itself, it's self-perpetuated because the industry is making it seem like a lot bigger of a deal than I feel like it is. Yes, Hannah.
I just saw this comment as you were talking and I'm like, yes.
Yeah, Hannah and I had a full discussion about the industry that I just posted today.
Go check that out. I'll put it in the description.
With like arcs, I kind of went through a phase, like when I went through with the ebooks, like I was like, oh, this is a thing that I could do now, because like I got to a point where I could actually email a publisher and they'll reply to me and I'm like, you answered my email and you want to send me this book. So yes, send it to me. So I think there was a period in time where I took like about 3 or 4 arcs. And then I realized I wasn't reading them in time. I was trying to rush them down before the day they were released and all kind of stuff. And then I told myself, I have to be realistic about what I read. So now if a publisher approaches me, I wouldn't request a book unless I really, 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 really badly want it and can't get it. And if a publisher approaches me and I know this is not something that I'm going to read, like Twilight with aliens, then I'm just going to say, I'm just going to say, you know what? No, or I'll just sometimes even ignore the email. Like, I you know, just have to be realistic. Yeah.
Somebody asked in the comments, I saw like, do you buy physical, like a finished copy of all the arcs that you end up reading and liking? Yeah, I don't like, well, obviously like the arcs I get are through work. Like I just keep the art copy and I don't bother. Like I'll give the finished copy I get to a friend rather than have 2 copies of the same book on my shelf, unless I like love the book. Like Daisy Jones and the Six is one of the few like double copies I own.
The only time that I would think that I would do that is if it was a book from a marginalized or like creator that I wanted to like monetarily support. But since publishing doesn't send me those books anyway, really, it never has happened to me yet. But yeah, if I like an arc that I received, I'm like, cool, generally keeping it, and unless that specific circumstance.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I did that with All American Muslim Girl by Nadine Jolie Courtney because I loved that book so much and I thought it was just incredible. And I just really wanted the pretty final hardcover copy, so I bought it. But I gave away my arc, so I wasn't going to just have 2 copies of the book. I gave away my arc to my cousin, who I know would love that book. And I did get, sometimes the publishers also offer to send me final copies. So with the Hen Awards and with Love from A to Z, I got final copies that the publisher sent to me. So, you know, it's like, otherwise, though, I wouldn't really rush to buy a final copy if I have the arc.
This comment is kind of out of context, but this person's talking about like tone differences in comments that people have, like addressing some of this stuff. So I do want to make it clear that I think that people can be overly familiar with content creators. They can be insulting, they can be rude. And so like there's a difference between like, hey, let's have a discussion as like a community and people being mean to you in the comments. And we did a BookNet Fest. I recently have a video on my channel about like moderating your space, and you have every right to moderate your space and your comments in any way that you need to in order to not have it be negativity under your face in your video. And I 100% believe that. And I do think that people can be a little bit like, calm down. Like, you know, this is like a community thing, but like I said, you're not privy to my bank account and I'm not showing you receipts. So there are boundaries that you need to draw and like lines that you can draw as an individual. And that's sort of different than like as a community talking about high level sorts of things.
And some people definitely do use like the guise of us trying to have like a productive discussion about things as a way to just be really shitty toward other people because it's their excuse to finally be able to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think once you start like speculating about people's finances and their well-being based on their consumer habits, and like I will talk openly about how my consumer habits affect me and my well-being, I am not remotely qualified to like assess how other people's like consumption habits are affecting them.
And like I said, we're putting things up for consumption. And so that kind of, you know, it is what it is. But people, I think, assume too much by like this. I showed you a 20-minute video. Like I didn't show you anything else. And there's so many conclusions that people can jump to that I think is also like not the thing, not healthy in a lot of ways. So there are two sides of this, of course. And I don't want to come across as like, you know, well, you made a video, so, you know, accept the abuse, because that is also not it. Like I said, moderate your spaces, get any negativity out of there as you can. And that is different from conversations happening in the community.
Yeah.
I just got to the pirating comments.
Fun!
Yay!
That's another discussion that comes up quite a bit, I feel like, on Book Twitter.
Yeah, tune in next time while we talk about Someone asked Books and Lala, this Desiree did, how often do you get unsolicited art? So I know this is directed at Lala, but I'm going to ask you guys, how often you get unsolicited arcs?
Never. Unsolicited arc is when they just send it to you, right? Without you even knowing. Yeah, no, that never happens to me. Like they'd either email me first or I would like beg them. Like nobody sends me like things unsolicited. I don't think people have my address like that.
I think it happens a lot, like when publishers don't have like a set blogger program. I feel like if it's just like publicists sending books to people who they happen to have on a list, it happens a lot more. And it's been part of discussions behind the scenes that we've been having about like, because I see us discussing like, I hate getting unsolicited arcs, and I go back and I'm like, they hate getting unsolicited art. Please let's stop doing this. So yeah, keep talking about it because people will see you having these discussions and hopefully something will stick.
You're just like the little publishing spy in the booktube community.
But
I did not know that this was like a thing like that. People were just getting. Oh, that's so.
Yeah, I get unsolicited arcs. Not like a ton. I think Lala said she got, at one point she was getting like 20 to 30 a month, which is wild to me. But just every so often, if I'm on a list for publishers, and for the most part, they will just reach out to me and say, hey, are you interested in this? But if they're pushing something like kind of like blanket, they'll just send a book or like a box full of like a different selections of books. And I'm like, I didn't ask for this. So.
Yeah, we've been thinking a lot more about like the impacts of printing arcs and the wastefulness of it. So there have been like productive discussions, at least where I work, there have been productive discussions about like moving more toward e-arcs and stuff like that, and sort of considering like, are we spending our money the best if we're printing all these arcs and just sending them willy-nilly to people who might not be interested?
My comments are kind of being weird right now because we got behind and I was scrolling through. So if you have anything that we didn't get to, like any questions here, just please put them down here again so that I can see them pop up new. But anything else that you guys can think of that we didn't get to cover about like this conversation that you usually see about consumerism?
My brain was just like, no.
He was like, done.
There's something There's so much that we didn't even get like the chance to touch on. Yeah.
As Taboki said like on our BNF panel, it's after you close and we're like, okay, log off, close it. You're like, dang it, I want to say it.
Yeah.
What we need to do is like close it and everyone has a secret stream of us, and that is like where the genius happens.
Everybody come back in 10 minutes for the after show.
Yes.
Sylvia asked an interesting question, I think. They said, I'm skeptical of people who get book subscriptions for free. Yeah. So are you really going to say you hate the books if you got them for free? Or if you're getting sponsored? For me, it's like if you send me a book, I've never been sponsored to talk about a book, but like if you send me a book and I don't like it, I will say, sorry, I didn't like it. You know, it's just a fair thing, I think.
Yeah, it's not going to negatively impact you if you are sent a book like for free. You are allowed to give, if you don't like it, you're allowed to give your own opinions, and that won't stop publicists from sending you books at all because it's free. And that is literally their job, is to get free publicity for the books. So like, never be scared if you get a free book to talk about it, whether you liked it or not. I've never also been sponsored for anything, but I also don't have a lot of access to like book boxes in Canada. And I've never seen, like, I've never liked the idea of somebody sending me a book and I don't know what the book is. No, thank you. I'd rather it be like a book of the month. I think you get to choose. Like if we got that, that'd be great. But like we don't have any sort of boxes. I think Crate is the only one off the top of my head that I know of.
Yeah. And bad press is still press. I mean, American Dirt is still doing well. Like I saw that book in our bookstore down here. Like you don't see half of the Caribbean books, but they had American Dirt on display, and I'm like,
wow.
Yeah. I think that a lot of people, and this is probably another one, I'm just going to invite you guys like every month about like, you know, the role of publishing and like money stuff on BookTube. And I think a lot of people have the idea that when publishers reach out, they're like, hey, can you give this a good review? Or like, can you review this? When most of the time it's like, hey, here's a book, please just like mention it. Yeah. Like, you know, if you just take a picture of it. And all they really want is like name, author, where you can buy the book. And that's like the only real expectation that they approach you with. I'm sure that there are some, and especially as you get bigger, that they want a little bit more from, but sort of at this level, I think where we all are, they're just looking for exposure. They're looking for that free press of you being like, hey, here's this book. And if I say, here's this book that is like, you know, enemies to lovers, and he wants to kill her, but also bone her, and I hated it, but there's like 100 people watching this, maybe more, that are like, that sounds amazing. Sold that book to them, you know? Yeah. So it doesn't really matter, especially I think if you're the type of person that can talk about like, hey, here's why I didn't like it, but here's why you may like it. Yeah. It's not really an expectation when I'm personally getting these books for review that I have to say anything positive about them.
Yeah, I'd have to check with my friend who works in ads, but I also don't think we are legally allowed to ask for like pay for a good review. I think that's like illegal. We can't solicit good reviews. So often with sponsorships, that's what you see. It's just like the book, like, oh, this is a book, this is what it's about, it's out this time, rather than like this book is amazing. Usually that comes from like the actual person. Again, I don't know if that's true, but I feel like somebody has said we legally cannot request that.
Just you're not allowed to download a pirate books either, guys. This is getting long, but people are still asking questions. If you guys are still okay.
That's fine.
Yeah. I still have half a bottle of wine. We can keep going.
I did a heavy pour for that reason. It was like up to here. So
I feel like I need to request, like, please send me my beer.
Yell. Put yourself on mute and yell.
Yeah. You guys are just going to see a hand come in.
So Bethany says, do you have any thoughts on the potential environmental impact of book collecting?
I mean, like for me, as I said, I get rid of books like very frequently. Like I unhaul books all the time. Just within the past couple of months, I probably unhauled over like 50 books or so, or maybe even more. And for me, it's just like, you know, I don't have the space, but I'm also very conscious of the fact that these are reusable items. Books are reusable in the sense that you could read them over and over again until they fall apart, right? Which maybe never. So I I always think about it. I'm like, if I don't have these strong sentimental attachments and if I'm not going to reread it, I just pass it on. And I think that that's the best way to do it sometimes. I mean, I'm not comfortable with telling people what you should do with your collection, but I think, you know, there comes a point where we all could kind of like be honest about what we have on our shelves and the fact that we're accumulating a lot, and that actually contributes to, you know, environmental degradation. When you are one person, you have this one book, and you read it once and you have it for years, when that book could actually be read by multiple people at a library, or could be passed on to multiple different people, you know, as opposed to everybody having to buy like the book, like one individual copy for each person, you know. So like, I mean, I guess I kind of strayed away because there was about the environment, but I started talking about unhauling. But like, I think
they're connected. No, I think they're super connected. Because I think like, again, like I always come into these consumer discussions thinking about all of the clothes that I bought and got rid of. And it's like, just like looking at that bags of stuff that I would have in my apartment to get rid of. It's just like, it's hard to separate the fact that it's like, oh, this is a thing that has gone through cycles of manufacturing, of like industry. Like there's a lot of stuff that's gone into it. And like, I can't fix the publishing industry. I can't fix the environment. Like, but I can think about the ways that I'm buying things that like impact to some extent the way these things are operating. And like, I think it's hard when you like, there's that bigger picture of like the world is falling apart, and part of the ways it's falling apart is the climate. And then also like, there's also the individual behaviors we're doing. There's the systemic issues at play. Like if we think about the big picture all the time, it's like really overwhelming. And of course my individual actions seem so minute against all that. Like what I really want are for like corporations to change their behavior, but like what is also within my power, or like are my own values or principles, I guess. I should say that more emphatically. My values and my principles. And I think especially with a lot of consumption conversations, like what I've learned from other people who I think are better about this is like the idea of trying to like live in a way that is as consistent with your values and principles as you can get. You're not going to get 100%, but like the extent to which you can like is worth trying.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think about how when like ebook conversations like crop up, which they don't as much anymore, but they used to all the time. Part of the thing that I would always hear is like, you're killing the publishing industry with your ebooks and stuff like that. So it's always really hard because you're balancing this idea of like books being like a physical sort of thing made of paper and like the harm that caused, but that being like the thing, that's the entire thing. So that idea of like contending with it individually and like aligning your morals and values with like your consumeristic habits, I think is important. And I think also that's kind of why I started looking at my own collection, because I think I said it earlier, but my thing was like, okay, don't think about the collection that you want for the now, but the collection that you want forever. Like this is something that's going to stay with you. And are there books that you're going to reread until they fall apart? Are there things that you would want to pass on to future hypothetical children or things of that nature? Like a book that feels really curated to be with me for the long haul. Like that's what I want. And that's kind of how I think about, curbing, this idea of just buying every book ever and ones that I'm never even going to read, and then having to deal with how I'm going to unhaul or get rid of these, and making it very specific to books that I know that I'm going to own in my lifetime and pass on to others afterwards. So,
yeah, like on a personal level, like the reason I mostly read ebooks first and then buy like a physical book is because of the environment, because like I also don't eat meat because I know that impacts the environment, and like that's me personally trying to do the most that I can do. But like from the publishing perspective, they are having discussions about it because they do know like just for like brand awareness, it's probably better for them to look like they're green and like thinking about how they can make the process more green. But also we're impacted by all the environmental stuff happening. We're having print shortages and can't print enough books because of everything that's been happening. And I feel like that's another reason like the industry is looking at itself, because it realizes it can't sustain itself at the rate it's going.
Somebody said that earlier in the chat they were talking about supporting indie romance publishing authors on Amazon and what we think about that.
Always support your indie authors. I love their hustle. I love that they get to keep all their money. Like, yes, I'm here for it. I don't really read a lot of like indie books in general, just because I'm trying to like keep up with what Trad Pub is doing, especially if I eventually want to move to editorial. I have to keep track of what everybody's doing. But I do support the hustle, and I know a couple indie authors, and I'm like, go buy their books, guys. Oh, thanks.
Yeah, I think like obviously people like we want to like a lot of us want to get away from Amazon as much as possible, but it's like again like figuring out where everything kind of fits in with what you want to support and how that like aligns with what you personally believe. It's like, well, like I cannot divest 100% from Amazon. Is this going to be one of the things that I like compromise on where I'm like, okay, at the end of the day, I'm also supporting an indie author. Like I feel good about that. Like it's a mixed bag. Like you're never going to feel like you're 100% like getting everything you want, but like, and like maybe like you also come out of that and you're like, I still don't feel like I can buy from Amazon. I think that's fine too. It's like a thing that you have to like figure out.
Yeah, I think everybody's different. And as I said, it's like a double-edged sword when it comes to Amazon, because on the one hand, we know Amazon is like evil. But on the other hand, it's like there are instances where you kind of need, it's the only option, right? Mm-hmm. Especially for authors who publish exclusively through, Kindle publishing or whatnot, So, I mean, there are places, as you said, Deboki, where you could compromise, I think. Mm-hmm. And I think if the only way you could support certain authors is through buying their books on Amazon, and you want to support them, I don't think there's anything wrong if it is that you would, be specific about what you're doing with Amazon. So just because you're supporting the authors don't mean that you're buying every single thing else from Amazon,
Yeah. I think that's part of like what we're talking about, bringing nuance to this conversation always, because it's not as simple as Amazon is evil, that's it, like shut it down. Because, you have these conversations and you just know certain authors are like sweating bullets because they're like, hey, this is how, think of the children, like I said earlier. But so, yeah, it's not that easy. And I'm somebody who really loves like Kindle, like romance books, and I partake, what I mean? So it's like a balance for me of like thinking where I can divest from Amazon. And until there is a different solution, there are places that I can't divest from Amazon. So and that is going to be constantly changing. And it's not so easy as having this conversation today where we know that in like 6 months, things could change and things could be completely different. So it's constantly engaging in this conversation and like reevaluating and see what is right for that moment sort of thing. Do publishers do undisclosed sponsored posts on IG, YouTube, Twitter with booktubers?
I don't think that's legal either.
Two different questions.
Paige is like, I drink, but I think
I'm drinking water. I had like 1 cup of wine and I've been drinking water ever since, guys. I swear. I just don't know the law stuff. That's not my like realm.
Paige is like, no, so you have to disclose whenever you're doing a sponsored post. And this is where language, I think, in the community gets kind of a little hazy, because some people will say, like, I'm working with the publisher, and you don't really know what that means. And so it might be that the publisher just sent them like a free book, but there was no money exchange there. Or it might be that there was money exchange, and that video that you're watching is a product of the publisher paying a certain dollar amount for that partnership in that video. But in that case, that must be disclosed. You can't have secret deals.
I think like there's also like hashtags and stuff now, like specifically you can't use like shorthand abbreviations or anything anymore. Legal was very clear to me that I need to disclose that I work for a company if I'm ever going to talk about our books. So I've just put that in all of my descriptions. Yeah. Like they're really cracking down on that kind of stuff now.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would suggest talking about the investment that comes with collecting books, but I feel like that's a whole last can of worms. Like the Rune editions of the Shadowhunter books being way expensive now.
Rune editions?
The Rune editions.
You can tell Sandra does not read this series.
Yeah. It's basic white.
That's not my realm.
That you have not read.
I don't know her.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this so much because I look at the books that I'm unhauling and I start doing the math of like how much money is represented there. And I'm like, my Lord, like I did this. So yeah, I mean, and that's why this conversation can be so touchy, is because it's just not a book. There's like a monetary value assigned there. And then I have things like multiple copies of books that I love, or special editions of books, and all of that is an investment. And is it an investment? I guess, because books do have a resale value. I don't know. That's a whole other kind of can of worms. But yeah, that is why I think this conversation is so touchy, is because it is all about money. And we're talking about, like, you know, an investment of things here.
Yeah, I saw a tweet a couple of days ago about there's like a book that's coming out that's a special 10th anniversary edition or whatever, and the person was commenting like, this author gets more money for the special edition, the publishers put money behind this book, but what about a marginalized author that could have been published with that money instead? And that's like, I'm not precious about having like fancy editions of books. Like, once it's a like copy of it and I loved it, I don't care. But yeah, I just think about that aspect of it when I'm thinking about collecting books. Like, do I really need to encourage them printing like 3 editions of the same book just because they know it's going to make money? Yeah.
So what do you guys do with the books that you unhaul? I think Sajid kind of already mentioned taking them to used bookstores and things like that. But what else? Do you give to friends? Do you donate?
I give a lot to friends. I actually don't take to the used bookstores. Like, what I do is I tell myself I'm going to donate all these books to the library, and then I get so lazy that I don't ever go to the library. So I take all the books, I carry them to my university, I put them on a table, and I write a note: free books to take, enjoy. That's like how I've unhauled like half of the books I've ever unhauled. Otherwise, I just give away to friends. The other day I gave to one of my viewers from down here who lives here. I asked her if she wanted any books, so I gave her. So it's just different. Sometimes I donate to the library. It just depends on like what I feel like doing. The easiest, most convenient way to just get them out.
Yeah.
I donate most of mine, and then like I have a shelf in my apartment that is literally for my friends when they come over. I'm like, here are the books that I no longer need. You can take anything from the shelf, and that's how I get things like out of my apartment.
I thought I was going to sell some. Like, I was like, oh, I have all these books. Like, because I was so worried about like the financial investment thing that I was like, I'll just like on Depop or something, I'll sell them. And I put one book up and it sold. And I'm like, I have to go to the post office. So now I'm like, maybe I don't want to do this. But for the most part, I do donate. I do give to friends. And then somebody mentioned that BookNet Fest is a book exchange every year. So I always have just like a stack of books that I can go and take there that somebody else is going to enjoy. And I've taken books to like BEA. And anytime I'm like at a book event, I'm like, I know someone is going to want these books. So I try to give them away as well.
Yeah, I remember Sam brought like a suitcase to Y'all Fest one year.
Yes. And she just tweeted and we sat there while people were like, I think we're getting close to the end. Demoka's like, I need my beer.
Did not prepare. Should have just had them all in a line.
I'm just here with my water.
Listen, you're staying hydrated. That's great.
I think we're getting close to the end. I love my library, love to see it. So Books and Lala mentioned too, like local women's shelter is always looking for book donations. We also have like a program, and I know a lot of different states do it kind of individually, where you can donate to local prison systems as well, which is something that I've done before. And I know that Alex, who was in the chat earlier, has done as well. So yeah, there are a ton of different ways that you can donate books that people are very appreciative of. And my local library too, I'm like, hey, do you want these books? And they're always like, yes. So I think that's it. All right. We did it, 1 hour and 40 minutes worth of feeling.
And we're never going to talk about it again. It's all
it's guys. It's done.
We just ended capitalism. You know, like it's
we
done.
Solved it.
If anybody ever brings this up again, you got to be like, shut it down, link them this video, and you're like, that's it. And so
they fixed it.
Amazon is canceled.
Yeah, thank you guys for joining us. So many of you guys stuck around for the whole time. I really appreciate it. You guys were having a great conversation in the comments as well. And maybe we'll do this again. I'm asking you in front of everybody, like holding you hostage, like we'll do this again, right?
yeah, sure.
I'm always here for you, Maddie.
No, but for real, this is fun.
Right.
I'll do this again.
Good night, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.